What's the worst you have seen a prank or joke backfire? Story 1. I was smitten with this beauty in high school. She was going to call me from her friend's house one Friday evening so that we could make arrangements to hang out. She lived not too far from me in the mountains. I was home having dinner with my family when I got a call from her friend who wanted to chat for a little while before she arrived. During the conversation, she informs me that she's looking out the window and she just saw the girl I liked crash her car into a tree. She screams and hangs up the phone. No answer when I call back. Several stressful minutes later, she calls me back crying and shouts that her friend has died. I lost it. My family sat there watching tears stream down my cheeks listening to this horrible news when all of a sudden I heard giggling on the other end of the line. "Sucker," she said. These two girls had plotted the whole thing and nobody was actually in any accident. I hung up. I was awash with a rousing mixture of relief and blind rage. My stepdad suggested that we pull a little prank of our own as he dug up a box of Halloween makeup. The girls called to apologize, and my mother calmly informed them that I had stormed out of the house in tears. We worked quickly to shred some clothes, and using fake skin, we transformed my face and arms to appear as if I had been mauled by a large cat. I looked gruesome. The girls called again to see if I had returned. Mom chastised them for pulling such a heartless prank and asked them to keep an eye out for me, as she thought I had been heading their direction. Darkness had swallowed the day when we parked at the end of her quiet dirt road. I was dripping with theatrical blood as I limped slowly towards the house. My stepdad and brother were following from the other side of the street behind some very tall weeds. I started crying for help. Not long before I arrived in her driveway, I heard them calling my name as they ran in my direction. I collapsed in the dirt and laid there, sobbing and mumbling something about a mountain lion. Both of the girls burst into tears. They were completely fooled by my wounds. My crush stayed with me while her friend ran to the house to call 911, and just before she reached the door, I jumped up and said, "Gotcha." They chased while I ran as fast as my feet could carry me before they finally gave up, my stepdad and brother sprinting alongside and laughing the whole way. These are two very mean pranks. Pranking someone to think that, a friend or romantic interest of theirs is dead? That's pretty mean. I don't know about that. But then pranking back with the cougar attack and stuff, one could argue that they deserved it, they did the bad thing first, but man, oh man, at least you, jumped up and said gotcha before anything went too far, so, I don't know, but man, oh man, this is too much for my old heart to take. Story 2. A little bit of backstory is required before I begin. When I was in grade 11, my English teacher, Mr. Crawford, went on personal leave because he had lost his entire family in a car accident. The entire school was devastated. He was an amazing man, he was funny and made learning fun, and everyone really liked him. When he was on his personal leave, we had a different substitute teacher every week for 3 weeks until Mr. James came along. Mr. James was by far the strictest teacher I ever had. He sucked the fun out of learning, and if you disrupted the class, he had a zero-tolerance policy. He would just kick you out. It didn't matter if you got kicked out on a Monday or a Friday, he wouldn't let you back in class for 7 school days, and it made you think twice about disrupting the class. About 5 months go by, and I arrive early to class, about 10 minutes early. I had spare the block before Mr. James isn't in the classroom, and no one else is either. So I decided to unscrew the screws in his chair to cause it to collapse when he sits in it. It was a brilliant idea. He wouldn't have known who it was, and it would give the class a chance to laugh at the most hated teacher in the school. I go to sit down, and I wait patiently, and my fellow students begin to show up, but still no sign of Mr. James. I take out my PSP and get distracted playing it. Little did I know that Mr. Crawford was back today. Mr. Crawford enters the classroom and everybody notices, but I'm too distracted playing my PSP game when my friend beside me says, "Hey, make me a mistake, Mr. Crawford's back." And before I can say otherwise, he sits down at his desk and his chair collapses beneath him. He ended up fracturing his wrist while falling. I have never felt so guilty in my life. The man had just lost his entire family in a car accident 5 months ago, and on his first day back to work, he fractured his wrist because of me. I am a fan of pranks if done right. I think that pranks can be fun. They can be... I shouldn't encourage revenge, but I mean, sometimes... No, don't. But I will say, I personally draw the line at any kind of prank that could physically injure somebody, because a chair breaking like that, it could have ended even worse. It could have seriously hurt, maybe even killed someone. It's unlikely, I know, but any prank that has like a chance for something like that, a not wholly unreasonable chance, is not a prank that I think is necessarily worth it. Story 3. I live in England, and here it's widely expected that you buy drinks at the pub in rounds. Anyway, there was this one social circle at my local pub that regularly went there, and one guy became pretty infamous for always, and I mean always, dodging his round. Going to the gents' men's room, leaving early, forgetting his wallet were all common ways he'd avoid it. This guy was middle-aged and fairly wealthy, so there was really no excuse for it. Anyway, this pub doesn't have a TV, but usually reads out the national lottery numbers on a Saturday night. His friends knew this guy played and arranged a prank where his wife briefly took his wallet to find out his numbers and then arranged for the pub landlord to read them out as the winning ones. The point was to see whether even when he had just become a millionaire, he'd still be too cheap to buy everyone a drink. They were all really excited about this, and every regular at the pub knew it was going to happen, so there was an unusually big crowd that night. Eventually, the time for the lottery numbers comes round, they get read out, and we all watch the growing look of realization in his face. He opens his wallet, gets out his ticket, and stares at it for like a minute without any emotional reaction whatsoever. The guy then turns to his wife completely stoically and says, "I've been having an affair with your sister for the last 4 years. You can keep the car and the house." He hands her the keys and strolls out the pub. Supposedly, she never heard from him again. She had to get divorced with him in absentia. The last my friends heard was that he moved to Australia. Okay, I mean, what an absolutely awful way for that wife to have to find out. Like, that's, embarrassing for her. It shouldn't be, but I know it would be, surrounded by all those people and stuff. But also, what a good way to get a scumbag to reveal himself and get her out of that marriage, because she deserves better. And I hope that jackbutt is miserable, in Australia or whatever, or has at least learned a lesson and is trying to better himself. Story 4. Put a bowl of wet, cold spaghetti propped up over my little brother's bedroom door so it would fall on him when he opened it. Hour or two later, I heard the crash, ran down the hall to find my big dumb dog happily covered in surprise spaghetti. Story 5. Find dead pigeons, put it on a classmate's desk. Classmate opens the desk. Pigeon flies away. Story 6. Not really the worst, but funny. I was about 5 years old. I thought it would be funny to sneak up on my dad and try to scare him, so I waited outside his bedroom door. 5-year-olds have no stealth, so he knew what I was doing. I'm poised and ready to spring, and my adrenaline is going up. I'm totally ready to scare him. Suddenly, my dad jumps out and says, "Boo!" I crapped my pants and started screaming. We both lost that game. Story 7. Unfortunately/fortunately, this wasn't my prank. A bunch of us were at a house party where we were all younger. Most of us got pretty drunk and decided to sleep over. As we all end up passing out, Buddy decides to take a habanero pepper and rub the juice on our hands along the thumb and forefinger, so when we woke up and rubbed our eyes, we have a rough wake-up. Somehow in the process, he gets a seed stuck in his eyelid. He was not a smart man. We all wake up to him screaming in pain, and in our drunken stupor, we all rub our eyes, causing even more screaming. I still feel bad for the neighbors. Story 8. We had a senior basketball game at our school against a rival school that was out in the boondock. We'd always make fun of them for being chicken farmer hicks, and they'd make fun of us for being uppity city folk. So, my buddy gets his hands on 5 chickens. He puts paper signs on them with the names and numbers of the guys from the other team. He brought the crates to the upper office in the gym that had access to the rafters. He waited until just before halftime and then released all 5 chickens from the rafters, thinking they'll fly all over and create havoc. What he doesn't know is that chickens don't fly very well. All 5 of them plummeted the 50 feet or so to the gym floor as the seconds ticked away in the first half. All 5 of the chickens either died or were horribly crippled afterwards. They just kind of flopped around on the ground while everyone looked bewildered as to what the F was going on. Oh, the horror. He got suspended for a week. Story 9. Not really a prank, but it was pretty hilarious to watch unfold. I'm a bartender, and one of my managers celebrated their birthday a few weeks ago. He'd already celebrated hard the night before, so he asked that when he poured shots that we use a whiskey bottle filled with iced tea for him. We happily agreed, thinking it would be funny watching the other manager get wasted and having trouble keeping up. An hour or so later, the other manager came and told us that he also was having a rough night and wanted us to use iced tea when we were pouring shots of whiskey for him. So both managers wander up to the bar and get shots with each other all night. All the bartenders know what's going on, but they have no clue that they are matching shot for shot of iced tea. Both start becoming amazed that the other can handle 20-plus shots of whiskey in only a few hours' time. Both are acting as though they are wasted. We ultimately tell them what was going on by pouring them a drink from the other person's bottle. Okay, I agree. It's not really a prank, but that is an amazing story. And I don't know how people could have kept a straight face for that long. Like, I would have been struggling through that. I'm pretty good at, like, keeping the laughter in and, acting like things are normal, but an hour of them doing these shots back and forth, like, I would have had to leave the room. Story 10. In college, a couple of girls broke into our dorm room and stole all our clothes. They had stashed them in their apartment, and while they were out, we took them back and hid them. We didn't let on that we knew who took them, and they started freaking out that they lost our clothes. They felt terrible, and we had to go to a thrift store to buy replacements, which they insisted on paying for. We wore thrift store clothes for weeks, letting them search for our clothes everywhere. It was beautiful to watch them go from the joy of pulling such a prank to the anguish and frustration of it getting out of their control. Story 11. You know that prank people play on kids where they'd go, I can't find insert kid's name. I guess I'll give up and go home, even though they're right next to them while playing hide and seek? I was playing hide and seek with my dad when I visited him in his office, and he did that. I was giggling under the table and waited for him to find me, and kept waiting. I guess someone probably distracted my dad because he actually forgot about me and ended up going home without me. His coworker had to send me home. My mom was so peed off. Story 12. On April Fool's Eve, I took all my dad's underwear out of his drawer and put it in the freezer. The next morning, I found him wrapped in a towel and all the underwear on his bed defrosting. He thought it was a good joke, so good in fact, that he started doing it to anything I left out long enough. This wasn't always a bad thing though, as I woke up to cool shoes on warm days more than once. Story 13. This is not my story, but a friend of mine told me that in high school there were these 2 girls, let's call them Brittany and Sarah, that were inseparable best friends. On Sarah's birthday, Brittany decided it would be hilarious to TP her car. She covered it entirely in toilet paper in the school parking lot. Meanwhile, this guy who liked to sneak away for a smoke was outside smoking in the parking lot when he saw the car covered in TP. For one reason or another, he decides to flick his lit cigarette onto the car. The toilet paper on the car goes up in flames, setting the car on fire. It's around this time that Brittany runs into the lunchroom giggling, "Hey Sarah, you have to see what I did to your car." Neither of them knew it was on fire at that point. Yeah, sure, Brittany just put the TP on there and then some other person smoking, did it. When in reality, they go out there and Brittany's like, "Oh my God, it's not supposed to be a fire. It was just toilet paper." And Sarah's just like, "Oh God, oh my God." And meanwhile, inside, Brittany's just like, "Yeah, I did that. I set it on fire, Sarah, because you deserve this." Mwahaha. Maniacal laugh. Story 14. During my church retreat, the guys of my grade decided to pull a prank on the girls of the same grade. We filled about 4 to 5 water bottles with pee throughout the trip and threw them in the girls' cabin. The bottles were closed. last night. It was funny until the girl's counselor got peed and demanded to know who did it. To escape the situation, one of my friends pretended to not know what was going on and drank a sip out of the pee bottles. Story 15. When I was in high school, some of the seniors decided to do a senior prank. They found a recipe for homemade stink bombs on the internet, then made large concentrations of the liquid in plastic garbage cans in the school library. Well, either they screwed up the recipe or it was bad to begin with because it caused a chemical reaction that burned through the cans and the floor. The FBI was called in and they considered it a chemical weapon. No one did time, but they were all found out and expelled. Story 16. At my high school, the seniors pulled what was probably the dumbest prank that I've ever seen. When I was a freshman, the seniors grabbed everybody's backpacks from outside the cafeteria, which were all just piled outside the cafeteria because nobody had lockers and the majority of the people there were too rich to care if something went missing from their bag, and they threw all the bags into the lake that is on campus. I don't really know what the purpose of the prank was other than to be douchebags, but in the end, the ringleader was expelled. The ringleader and the others were forced to compensate every person whose bag they had thrown into the lake, which was quite a bit of money because there were about 5 textbooks and a TI-83 per bag. Their worst punishment, though, was having to clean the lake by hand. That was the worst punishment because the lake was absolutely disgusting before they tossed about 100 backpacks into it. They were hauling tires and a bunch of other random refuse out of that lake for the entirety of their senior year. Throwing people's backpack into a gross lake isn't a prank. Like, if you went through the backpack and, shifted the contents one backpack over for, every backpack so everyone had to, resort it, that's kind of a prank because there's some amount of cleverness involved, I guess. Even that's a stretch. But just taking backpacks with potential expensive stuff and everything in them and throwing them into a lake is just vandalism. Story 17. White Elephant Party. One of the gifts is a prank lottery card. Lottery card ends up in the hands of a family member whose daughter was very ill and had extremely high medical bills. The winnings would have easily covered them. Many tears were shed, and then the prank was revealed. Many more tears were shed. I have no effing clue why the person who put the lotto card in the gift exchange allowed it to go on for as long as they did. As soon as that card ended up in the wrong hands, I would have spoken up. Yeah, no, I've seen these fake lottery cards, and I think they can be funny if, with the guy who was cheating on his wife, someone who needs a little ribbing like that, but can also afford to not win all that money, that I think is an okay prank. But having it at a white elephant party where someone who could genuinely use that money and tricking them, that's not a fun prank. That's just cruel. And this version of it, it's not just a family that needs money, but for a daughter who has medical bills and is ill, that's heartbreaking. So yeah, be careful with those. That is not a prank for everyone. Story 18. While in Park City, my relatives got quite drunk. No food, plus hot tub, plus beer. Most of us were staying at a hotel. Others were there just to party. When it was time to go to sleep, my family headed back to our room to find that it was robbed. Being the most drunk they've ever been, my family members go on a rampage. My mom starts yelling at nobody. My dad starts running down the hall towards the check-in desk in a fit of rage. My uncle starts picking fights with the locals across the hall. Reminded me of that kid who shoves a remote up his butt when his mom canceled his WoW account. Cops were called. All hell broke loose. Turns out my uncles thought it would be funny if they hid all of our stuff in the bathroom. My family was too drunk to check at the time. The worst part of it all was the fact that I was trying to impress a foreign exchange student. Story 19. I didn't experience this, but I was friends with a family member of the victim, so the story may not be completely correct. That warning aside, here is what I understand to be true. In the height of jackbutt, 4 or 5 boys decided to play a prank on my friend's family member and tape it, then post it to YouTube. The prank should have gone as follows. Hang out on a bridge, douse boy with flammable liquid, push the boy over the bridge and into water extinguishing flames. Boys all laugh and post to YouTube. Unfortunately, the boy fell onto the cement of the bridge and burned much of his face and upper torso and is heavily scarred. Remember when I said that I don't like pranks where there is some modicum of a chance of someone being hurt and therefore that would make the prank not worth it? There wasn't just a chance of this not working. This was just almost certainly going to hurt someone in some way. Like pushing them off a bridge, even if everything had worked out how they planned. Falling off of a bridge isn't a good thing. Oh boy, don't do stuff like this. Story 20. There was a guy I'd gone to school with since second grade. He was last picked in gym class, cried if the team he was on lost a game, wore his Boy Scouts uniform to school when he didn't need to, was president of the Stamp Club, and a tattletale. Also, if memory serves, he smelled like pee. I'd dealt with his crap and shenanigans for years, and one day in 7th grade, I decided to pull his seat out from under him. The entire auditorium laughed, and I strutted across stage in some effing victory lap, waiting for him to seal the deal as a loser and cry. As I headed back to my seat, his face reddened and tears welled. He was packing up his backpack. I'd won. I would rule junior high. I flopped onto my seat like the queen of the world and landed on the effing floor. That little crap pulled the seat out from under me. I'd scraped my back on the way down and broke my bra strap. I felt the red face. My back hurts. Tears. There are going to be tears. That's when I realized the teacher saw him do it. I looked at her, waited for her to punish him for picking on a girl. She sensed this and looked me straight in the eye and said, "Feminism means equal treatment. Congratulations on being a real feminist." Total attitude adjustment moment for me. He's the only person I went to school with I'm still friends with. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.